Venus and star blessings, everybody. I just want to give you some thoughts and ideas around some pretty interesting aspects taking place this week. One of them is Mars in Taurus, squaring Pluto. So, this is a chart actually for today. And there you see Pluto at 1 degrees, 45 minutes of Aquarius and retrograde. The retrograde factor is significant. We'll talk about that in a minute. And here is Mars in Taurus. It's been there for about a day or so. The other thing we're going to look at as well is that Venus, who is still invisible in the underworld, she's still there, invisible, is forming a square to Saturn. And in a few days' time, she will form a square to Neptune. So those are the three things that I want to look at today. And before we even talk about what that means, the very first thing that we must point to is that this square between Mars and Pluto and Venus and Saturn and Venus and Neptune, this particular square with all those alignments is actually a first quarter square. And that's um, a very major point to actually note. A square is a particular aspect, but a square is born out of a particular cycle, such as the sun and moon cycle that we witness every day. And then we have the new moon, the full moon, back to the new moon, etc. When the sun and moon are forming that relationship, that dance, they are going through all these different phases. One of those phases is a square phase, and there is a first quarter square and there is a last quarter square. That they are both square aspects, meaning the angle between them is 90 degrees, but they're not the same energy. And that's a very important distinction to make right off the bat. So Mars squaring Pluto, this is a first quarter square. Venus squaring Saturn, again, this is a first quarter square. And Venus, which will square Neptune in a few days' time, that too is a first quarter square. So let's just back up. First of all, if we go back to 2 years ago, there was a square between Pluto and Mars, but in cardinal signs in Aries and Capricorn. So a few days later, Mars ingressed into Taurus, right? So there wasn't a square between Mars and Pluto 2 years ago in fixed signs, which is what we are seeing today, Taurus and Aquarius. Mars is in Taurus, Pluto is in Aquarius. So it's just important to see that as well. If you just go back to 2 years ago, the square was happening in cardinal signs. So we've got this entire brand new energy is what I'm getting at, right? With Mars in Taurus and Pluto in Aquarius. Okay, because 2 years ago, Pluto was not in Aquarius. So this first quarter square between Mars and Pluto and this energy between them is a totally brand new energy in our entire lifetime, actually, because this is the first time we're seeing Pluto in Aquarius in our lifetime. The last time Pluto was in Aquarius was 247, 248 years ago. So this is a brand new energy from an evolutionary perspective to begin with. And also, like I said, this is a first quarter square. Now, where did this journey begin? Where did the aspect begin? Which was basically a conjunction between Pluto and Mars. That's where this whole cycle began. So what we are seeing now on the, say, 9th, 10th, 11th of June, and I would go as far as saying that this aspect, this square, although Mars will be moving away from Pluto, separating from Pluto, it's still going to be in a square aspect for quite a few days. In fact, right up till the 25th of June. By the 25th of June, Mars will be about 12 to 15 degrees away from Pluto, but that's still within range. So this energy is very, very potent for quite some time. But before we talk about that, I just want to show you where it all began. And just excuse me because I've still got sinus issues. And yeah, it's pretty challenging to breathe properly. Okay, so 14th of February 2024, have a look at Pluto and Mars. Okay, there they are at 0 degrees of Aquarius, 46 minutes, forming their conjunction. Right, so this is where it all began. It began in February. This is called a new phase conjunction. It's a brand new cycle, brand new energy between Mars and Pluto. Again, we had not experienced a Mars-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius prior to this point in this lifetime. So it was a new energy, okay? New phase conjunction is very much like the new moon. It's a totally brand new energy. It's, it is a time of setting intentions, planting seeds, just being aware that there's a new energy being born, essentially. And obviously the thing that you need to connect to that is, well, what are the planets involved here? The two planets involved are the planets of willpower. And Mars is a little bit like a servant to Pluto, if you like. You wouldn't like that word, but he kind of is, because Pluto, in terms of evolutionary astrology, which is a lens that I work with quite a lot, teachings that I work with quite a lot. So Pluto correlates to the soul for each of us, the soul of the whole world, and the soul for every individual. So the soul has very specific desires, very, very, very specific desires in every incarnation. And Mars is the planet that Pluto will try to call into its field, if you like. Mars is pretty much always wanting to do his own thing. He's got his own motives, his own agenda, his own course of action, his own personal desires, and so forth. But from an evolutionary perspective, and a more, for lack of a better word, conscious perspective, or conscious awareness, one of the most powerful things that we can integrate in our life is the alignment of Mars and Pluto. That is the relationship between them, to align them together so that Mars is not working at cross purposes with the highest will, which is Pluto, which is the soul. So those are really good key points to keep in mind when you're thinking about the energy of Mars Pluto. What's happening with this energy beyond the personality scope of things of yes, it's Mars, it's it's my willpower, it's the actions that I want to take. And Pluto is very, very intense, and it'll be a very, super intense energy because Pluto is extremely intense, and, yada, 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 right? The personality level of it, that's there, of course. And in fact, that'll be probably the most common sort of response or reaction to this energy. But for people who are working at more integrative levels, people who are really trying to work with their will, on a conscious level, not from a personal, well, yes, personal, but not just for one's own personal aspects of greed, just selfishness. Because Mars can be incredibly selfish. It's just about what it wants. And so part of our evolution and growth is the integration of these two energies. And that, as a matter of fact, can be seen very, very clearly in your birth chart. That is, what is the phasal relationship between Mars and Pluto in your birth chart? I could do a reading for you just on that and what that means on an evolutionary level. It's huge. So going back to the present moment, or at least 14th of February 2024, this is where this cycle began. So a good thing to do, I suppose, is think back to this period in time and just try and think back to what was happening, what you might have started at that time. Were there any challenges relative to your own will versus somebody else's will? You know, we are talking about planets that can bring up a lot of conflict, even in a conjunction, because a conjunction aspect contains all possibilities, all possibilities. Anything can be born out of a conjunction, new phase conjunction. So, thinking back perhaps to what was going on in February, and then when we come to the present moment, which is here, what we're seeing is we're seeing the first quarter square, which is implying, in Dane Rogers' terminology, he coined it crisis in action. And what that really means in plain English is that whatever was set into motion when these two formed their conjunction, the new phase conjunction, which, as I showed you, was in February of this year, whatever was set in motion is now gotten to the point where its validity and authenticity and realism is tested. So it's really about taking quite a realistic approach, and Mars is in Taurus, which is very earthy energy as well. So it is about the practical implementation of how we do things, right? So it's just a testing field of what was initiated perhaps at that time earlier this year relative to your own desires, your own personal will, your own course of action, all Mars, Pluto things, of course, and whether that's going to work or not. This is the testing time of how much of that can truly be integrated, how much of that you can, you know, apply realistically in your real life, and how much of it is going to perhaps bring up conflict and tension, because that's a possibility. It's a square. It's a first quarter square though. So the conflict and the tension, the problems, the sort of power struggles, if you like, that's another key theme that tends to come up with Mars Pluto, will be experienced on the external, right? That can be with other people, that can be with anybody, with friends, with people you work with people you've just recently come to know. It can be with any type of person, because it's really just describing wills, two sets of wills, if you like, a person's will perhaps being at cross purposes with the other person's will. So both want to be in that powerful position, if you like, and no one's wanting to kind of give in or surrender. You know, the wills are at cross purposes. That's part of this picture here. So I guess the awareness would be to recognize, well, how much of this is really worth me, you know, fighting with this person, let's say, or, you know, getting into conflict or argument with this person about this particular matter or this particular issue, or you know, just to keep it very simple, this person said this or this person did that, and I really don't like what they did. I really don't like what they said. So the question becomes, you know, how much of your time is worthy of investing in staying in a conflicting space, or is it more worthy to just recognize, okay, this situation isn't working for me, so I'm going to channel this energy into something more productive for myself, for instance. That's just a, you know, a basic example. That's a very real example, though, that could very likely come up for people, because, as I said, it's just really about understanding that it's the highest will and the lower will, highest will being Pluto, lower will being Mars, perhaps being at cross purposes, and or perhaps just recognizing what's not working at the moment relative to what you are trying to put your willpower into. It could be a work situation. You could be pushing through some type of situation that has been a little bit difficult, a little bit testing, and you've sort of gotten to the point where it's the conflict is just, it's blocking you. It's not allowing you to move in a particular direction, or there's perhaps a sense of frustration. All these are possibilities. I guess the other thing that we need to really consider with this as well is that Mars in Taurus, although it's traditionally speaking, Mars in Taurus is in its detrimental position. So it's in Venus's sign. Now, although the traditional essential dignities and abilities, define Mars in Taurus as being in detriment, meaning it's not its strongest point because it rules Scorpio, which is the opposite sign to Taurus. I've seen Mars in Taurus do really, really well, as a matter of fact. I've seen people excel in numerous ways with Mars in Taurus. It's pretty interesting because they are very different energies. Mars rules Scorpio and Aries. Mars is more self-directed or self-oriented. But Taurus can be very self-oriented as well. It is about my own survival, my own safety network, my own resources, building my own foundations, making things work for myself in the best way possible, and persevering, Taurus, working hard at it, taking one step at a time, understanding that there's a process unfolding, that everything can't just happen overnight. I've got to work at this, one bit at a time. That's Taurus. And I think Taurus, because it's ruled by Venus, it cools Mars down. Mars can be very, very hot-headed. So in Taurus, it can chill out a lot more. It has the ability to persevere, to be a little bit more relaxed, and just keep pushing with that Mars energy in a way that's coming from a Venusian level. That when you bring Venus into things, it can bring diplomacy, it can bring peace, it can bring some harmony, it can bring beauty, it can bring balance. So Mars has the the ability to really tune into those Taurian qualities while it's in Taurus, even though traditionally speaking it's in detriment. I've seen Mars in other places of detriment. I've seen it being, a lot worse off, like Mars in Cancer, I think is actually a lot more difficult, for instance. Mars in Libra, I think, again, that's another Venus ruled sign. I think Mars in Libra is a lot more challenging than Venus in Taurus. That's my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with it, and you can debate it if you like. That's all good. I'm just saying what I've noticed from my observations. And it's logical because Mars in Libra, being another Venus ruled sign, well, Libra is definitely about partnership, relationship, and balance. And Mars is not about any of that. Mars is about doing my own thing. But Taurus can be very much about doing my own thing as well. That's why somehow I feel that energy works a lot better. Now, Pluto is retrograde. So when Pluto is retrograde, we are stepping outside of the consensus reality. We are stepping outside of the external, you could say, external validation. Every time a planet goes retrograde, there's a calling to go within, to seek answers within, to go through a reflective process, to slow down, to revisit certain things. So this first quarter square between Mars and Pluto, Pluto is retrograde as well. So we must consider that into this process. That sort of slows down the energy a little bit as well, because Mars is in Taurus and Pluto is retrograde. So there's an, even though it's a first quarter square and it is crisis in action, and it is about testing our will, testing things that we may have initiated back in February, it is also about being more reflective as opposed to being super aggressive with this energy, because this energy can be super aggressive. There's no two ways about it. It just depends on the individual, the circumstances, and how conscious one is, how aware one is, and so forth. But that's how I'd be thinking about this Mars square Pluto, and just being mindful that it can be a trigger point. It can be very explosive, and in the wrong hands it will be. I have no doubt about that. So just think about where that aspect falls, in your own birth chart. Where's Mars in Taurus in your birth chart? Where's Pluto in Aquarius in your birth chart? And what do those houses represent? What are they reflecting for you, and so forth? And where did the conjunction begin? That's super important, right? Because it's all just unfolding from where they began, which was in Aquarius back in February. So we're going to now say almost identical things actually with Venus and Saturn, except we're going to bring in the principles of two different planets in this case. But the principles remain the same because it's a first quarter square. The conjunction between Venus and Saturn, did I get the chart for that? Let me see. It was basically, it was around about March anyway, okay, when Venus was in Pisces. So around about March, there was a conjunction between Venus and Saturn in Pisces. So that was a new phase conjunction. Once again, same principles, same core meanings, except we are thinking about Venusian things and Saturnian things. And let's be honest about this. Saturn and Venus, they're not the best of friends. They have nothing in common. It's really, it's just not the nicest energy. That's the truth. There are good things about it. Yeah, sure. Longevity of relationships, stability with finances, things of that nature. Can also be separating from a relationship. It can be feeling alone, even when you're in the relationship. There's lots of different things about Saturn, Venus. But in any case, if there was something that was going on from a financial perspective or relationship matters back in March, this is the time where it's being tested again. This is a testing field. Venus is square Saturn. This is a first quarter square. It's the same principles. But the thing that changes this, though, is that Venus is still invisible. So I think perhaps for that reason, if there is some frustration and difficult feelings and difficult things that come up, it can be quite an inner process, even though the first quarter square speaks to external crises, things manifesting externally. Because Venus is still invisible, we must take that into account and understand she's still going through her whole entire rebirth. She's so close to leaving the underworld, but she's not there yet. She basically doesn't appear in the sky until around about the 4th of July. That's almost a month away. So she's still processing, clearing, cleansing, releasing, purging. She's still going through all of that in different ways, right? And while she's forming this square to Saturn, that's part of the picture. Now, Venus square Saturn, again, like I said, it's not the nicest aspect, that's for sure. And you may have just had a situation that came up recently. It could be with a friend, it could be with a lover, it could be with your partner, where there's been a separation, a removing yourself from the company of somebody, not wanting to be connected to that person anymore. So those are very common themes that can come up. And the next thing to watch, which will be, let's just see when that is. Okay, here it is here. So Venus square Neptune, that's on the 17th of June. So that's just, 6 days away, 7 days, something like that. Um, hmm. Once again, this is a first quarter square. My favorite saying for Neptune energy is the hardest goodbye is saying goodbye to an illusion. And that statement has so much meaning to it. It is so profound. And if you understand astrology and understand Neptune in its entirety, as much as you can, you'll understand that that statement couldn't be further from the truth. It's so profound. And so when you're talking about Venus, Neptune, that statement is even more profound. Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, meaning that Neptune is the ultimate source of love, and Venus is the absolute goddess of love. When you mix those two together in a third dimensional reality with our own projections, our own ideals, our own perceptions, and what we think of others, what we think they need, what we think we want from them or expect from them, and so on and so forth. When you put all that into the mix, into a bowl, and mix it all together with Venus Neptune, the result is usually disappointment, almost always, because it takes a very detached and very aware individual to be able to hold a space for love, beauty, the ultimate source of truth and love, Neptune, and to have a deep, perhaps, love or appreciation for someone or something, but to allow it to be what it is and not to impose your expectations on it for what you want out of it, whether that's a person, a situation, etc. So a Venus square Neptune always brings up those sorts of themes. And so perhaps if there was something that started in around about March with the conjunction between Venus and Neptune, this is the first quarter square. This is the crisis point. This is the testing field. This is where all your illusions might be blown out of the water, or where you might just also become very clear on, well, I was being totally idealistic about that person or that situation. I was in la la land. I was just dreaming. And so you might just get more realistic about it. But whatever it is, you have to process it internally and really honor it very deeply in your own worth and your own value, Venus, internally, because Venus is hidden. She is in the underworld. So those are the themes to really consider for this week, actually, and next week. That's what's going on with, with Mars, Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, and Venus. That's what I wanted to share with you guys today. I'm going to leave it here, and I will see you guys soon. And just before I go, just a reminder, I've got 2 different courses available at the moment. I've got a couple of workshops available, and if you want to have a reading with me, there's also availability for that. There's many different types of readings I offer, many, many different types. It just depends on who you are, what you need at this point in life, and how you'd like to work with the divine cosmic sky map, the stars. So reach out if you want to know more, and I will see you guys soon. Sending you all so much love. Take care and see you soon.